All right. So now we are at the second step of the onboarding and retention optimizer framework, which is the track. This is where you would see the step by step how you're going to track those events. All right. So with that, step number one, set up those events. So next thing is like you can go and you can have any analytics device of your choice or any analytics tool of your choice. But once you've identified those events in the product, then you're going to go about like how you're going to track them, right? So once you have you would see an implementation spec. So I would just tell where to find those resources. So there is something called resource for track stage in this thing. So you can get all those resources for the track stage. All right. So now let's come to the step number one, like tracking. So you have identified the events in the last and identify stage. You identified event, KPI, trigger, and all those event definition. So I would recommend Mixpanel. You can go ahead and see how to implement Mixpanel. If you want any help over there, do let us know. We help companies implement Mixpanel, but for now, you can also do it yourself if you feel like. Go ahead, and then you can identify the different kinds of properties that you're going to track all them, right? So, for example, let's take one simple example. Um, So suppose everyone has used Zoom call, all right, during this time. Almost everyone on the internet has at least seen or heard about Zoom call. So let's take an example of a Zoom call. Uh, so suppose the event that is creating a scheduled meeting, all right. So the event name would be schedule a meeting. It affects a certain set of KPI number of meetings scheduled or created depending upon this thing, the trigger, the event definition. And here there would be like various sort of event properties that you want to track. For example, um, so event super or user property usually comes from the mixed panel terms. So you can read about like what are these properties, but typically an event property is like connected to the event that is happening. You would see by the example what do I mean. User profile is connected to the user, and then the event super property is something that you can track uh, at various stages. So with that, let me get started with the event properties. For example, when you're scheduling a meeting, uh, what time that you selected. So that's an event property. Uh, what was the time zone that you selected. Again, that is an event property. Uh, then you can think of who all were invited, number of people invited. That is again an event property. So, and for example, then let us add over here. I'm not able to move, but let's see if we can figure out some way to do it. Uh, yeah. So okay. So the user property can be like what is the account type. Then it can be let's assume it's the same one just to save your time. Account type, you have user email. This would be again user profile property. So when an event occurs, this tells like what all data that you need to pull and send it to Mixpanel so that you can track it later. So this typically depends upon the kind of metrics that you want to track. For example, you want to track like uh, are people setting up 30 minutes meeting, 45 minutes meeting, or 1 hour meeting? What is the nomenclature? So uh, time period. So you can have a property called time period, which is the event property. So whenever a new event is scheduled, it can say which for what time it was scheduled. Then was it done through an integration? So, for example, if you have used HubSpot, you would see like you can create an event from HubSpot and that created from Zoom. So Zoom can keep a track of like what is the integration that was used for creating in HubSpot, right? So you get the idea depending upon your company goals and your company values and what kind of data that you want to track. You can start putting on down these details and then you can take it up from there. All right, so this is a certain very good example that you would see. Now, so track is set up events. Once you've done that, we move on to once you've set up this track. So there's usually a gap between step one and step two. I have not explicitly mentioned, but this is what you need to do. So once you've installed Mixpanel, give it a week, give it 2 to 3 weeks, or at least a month, and then you would see the details like what is the difference between the churn users and the retained users. So the more time it gets, the more uh, date, the data gets better, but a 1 month data is obviously an ideal one. And if all of your accounts are annual, then it might get very difficult because you unless and until you can figure out some way like if they are doing it on their own, signing up on their own and doing it, if it is so for now, let's keep like 1 month is certain period that you should like start observing data. So what you're doing over here is basically running the churn versus retain analysis. So here you are seeing and trying to identify the pattern of how do the churn users behave and how do the retain users behave. For example, when I was doing heading the product for called Call Hippo, we identified that the churn users had a typical behavior. They were not making any calls in the first 3 days, and the retained users were making at least one call in the first 3 days. So that once we identified this thing, then we were able to nudge, which is the next step that you would see, like how we were able to like point out and identify uh, those events in a better manner. Like, okay, these are the things that is not working out, and this is how you should change. So churn versus retain analysis helps you tell that how is my churn user behaving and how are my retain users behaving. All right, and then once you've done that, you can set up those dashboards into the Mix panel or any implementation product analytics of your choice. And with that, keep these are the certain mechanisms. If you have like different flows for free to paid conversion or demo to paid conversion, you can create those sort of mechanisms also just to keep a flag like how what was the conversion from free to paid and demo to paid. So maybe a better way to identify them, and then you can keep on tracking like who came from demo, who came from free to paid, and how they were doing it and behaving with the system. All right. Um, with that comes the most important part called nudge. So here you would see how identify, how track comes together, and you create that nudge mechanism to ensure that people are staying with you, right? To ensure that you have a better chance of retaining them and with a proper analytical framework. All right. So with that, see you in the next section.